The observation deck of the diplomatic station floated in the darkness of space like a small island of light. Earth hung in the distance, a blue and white marble that reminded Jiho why he was here. He stood near the large window watching ships arrive from distant star systems. Today was the day. After 3 years of preparation, the Thessian delegation would finally arrive. Jiho touched the small device on his belt. It was a light projector, something he had built himself to help him speak the Thessian language. Most people thought he was crazy. His friend Hyun had told him many times to just use the standard translator like everyone else. But Jiho believed that real understanding came from effort, not from machines doing all the work. The speakers in the ceiling made a soft sound. A voice announced that the Thessian ship had docked. Jiho felt his heart beat faster. He had practiced for this moment 1,000 times in his small quarters. He knew the greeting phrases. He understood the basic structure of their language. But knowing something in your head and actually doing it were two different things. The diplomatic chamber was crowded with representatives from different species. Jiho recognized the tall Mandarin ambassadors with their 6 arms. There were also the floating Quellan observers who never spoke but recorded everything. Humans were the newest members of this galactic community, and everyone knew it. They had only made first contact 15 years ago. To these ancient civilizations, humanity was like a child trying to sit at the adult table. Jiho stood with the small human delegation. There were only 5 of them. Ambassador Park led the group, a stern woman with gray hair who had spent her entire life preparing for this role. Next to her stood Hyun, who gave Jiho a worried look. Hyun knew what Jiho planned to do, and he did not think it was a good idea. The doors opened with a smooth sound. The Thessian delegation entered the chamber, and every conversation stopped. They were beautiful in a way that made Jiho forget to breathe for a moment. Velnara walked at the front of the group, tall and elegant. Her skin seemed to glow with soft light, patterns moving across her arms and face like living art. The Thessians communicated partly through these light patterns, something Jiho had spent months trying to understand. Ambassador Park stepped forward and began the formal greeting in standard galactic common language. It was safe and proper. Velnara responded in the same language, her voice carrying a musical quality that the translator could not quite capture. The initial formalities went smoothly. Treaties were mentioned. Trade possibilities were discussed in careful diplomatic terms. Then Jiho stepped forward. Hyun reached out as if to stop him, but it was too late. Jiho touched his light projector and began to speak. The words came out slowly, carefully shaped by his human mouth trying to make sounds it was not designed for. He was attempting to say a traditional Thessian greeting, one that meant, "I see your light and honor your path." The effect was immediate. Velnara stopped speaking. Her light patterns flickered in surprise. Then she made a sound that Jiho would never forget. She laughed. It was not a small, polite laugh. It was bright and musical, filling the chamber with amusement. The other Thessians joined her, their patterns dancing with what was clearly entertainment at his expense. Jiho felt his face grow hot. He heard whispers from the other alien delegates. The Mandarin ambassador made a clicking sound that his translator rendered as "how amusing." One of the Quellan observers actually moved closer, as if recording a moment of particular interest. But Jiho did not stop. He had prepared for this possibility. Rejection and mockery were always risks when you tried something difficult. He adjusted his light projector and tried again, this time attempting to add the pattern of lights that accompanied the greeting. His device flickered and created a simple pattern, nowhere near as complex or beautiful as the natural Thessian glow. But it was something. Velnara's laughter faded into something else. Her head tilted slightly, and her light patterns changed to colors Jiho did not recognize. She spoke in rapid Thessian to her companions, too fast for Jiho to follow. Then she turned back to him and switched to Galactic Common. "You attempt our language," she said. Her tone was not quite mocking anymore, but it was not respectful either. It was the tone someone might use with a clever pet that had learned a trick. "How long have you studied?" 3 years, Jiho answered. He kept his voice steady despite the embarrassment burning in his chest. 3 years, Velnara repeated. She exchanged looks with her delegation. "Our children study for 15 years before they are considered competent speakers, and they have the advantage of proper biology." She gestured to her glowing patterns. "You cannot truly speak Thessian without light speech. It is impossible for your species. Perhaps, Jiho said, but impossible things become possible when someone tries hard enough. Something shifted in Velnara's expression. It was subtle, and Jiho was not sure if he was reading it correctly. Her patterns changed to a deeper blue shade. You are either very brave or very foolish, she said. Maybe both, Jiho admitted. Ambassador Park stepped in smoothly, guiding the conversation back to safer topics. The formal negotiations continued, but Jiho noticed that Velnara kept glancing at him throughout the meeting. Several times he caught her light patterns shifting when she looked his way, but he could not read what they meant. After the meeting ended, Jiho returned to his quarters feeling defeated. Hyun followed him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You tried, Hyun said. That took courage. I made us look foolish, Jiho replied. He sat down heavily on his bed. She laughed at me. They all did. Yes, but you did something no other human has attempted, Hyun said. You tried to meet them in their own language. That means something, even if they do not see it yet. Jiho was not sure if he believed that. He looked at his light projector, this simple device that could never match the natural beauty of Thessian communication. Maybe Velnara was right. Maybe some things truly were impossible. Maybe humans would always be outsiders in this galactic community, unable to fully connect with species so different from themselves. But as he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Jiho thought about his grandmother. She had fled her country with nothing but determination and learned a new language in a foreign land. She had taught him that every word you learned in another language was a bridge you built to another person's world. The bridges might be shaky at first, but they could grow stronger with time and effort. Tomorrow he would try again. The formal trade negotiations had stalled. Jiho sat in the back of the diplomatic chamber, watching as Ambassador Park tried once again to explain humanity's position on territorial boundaries. The translation came through clearly enough, but something was being lost. He could see it in the way the Thessian delegates shifted in their seats, their light patterns flickering with what looked like confusion or frustration. Velnara sat with her delegation, her expression neutral but her patterns telling a different story. For the past week she had been teaching Jiho every morning before the official meetings. He had learned more in those 7 days than in his previous 3 years of self-study. She was a patient but demanding teacher, correcting his pronunciation again and again until his throat hurt from the effort. This morning she had taught him about a Thessian concept that had no equivalent in human languages. The closest translation was shared space honored by memory, but those words did not capture the full meaning. It was about places that held significance for a community, spaces that shaped identity and belonging. The concept was deeply tied to how Thessians thought about territory and ownership. Now, listening to Ambassador Park struggle to explain why certain border regions mattered to humanity, Jiho realized the entire negotiation was failing because of this exact misunderstanding. The translators were converting words, but they could not convert concepts. The Thessians did not understand why humans cared about specific regions. To them, it seemed arbitrary and greedy. But if the concept could be explained properly, in their own language and framework, perhaps they would see it differently. Jiho stood up. Hyun, sitting next to him, grabbed his arm. What are you doing? He whispered urgently. Something that might help, Jiho whispered back. Or it might get me thrown out of the diplomatic corps. We will see. He walked to the front of the chamber. Ambassador Park paused mid-sentence, surprise crossing her face. Jiho, this is not the time. Ambassador, with respect, I think I can help, Jiho said. He turned to face the Thessian delegation. His heart hammered in his chest. But he had learned something important from Velnara over the past week. Hesitation was the enemy of communication. You had to commit fully even if you might fail. He touched his light projector, activating it. Then he began to speak in Thessian. The words came slowly, carefully shaped by weeks of practice. He was talking about the concept Velnara had taught him that morning, trying to bridge it with human experience. He spoke about Earth, about the places where humans first learned to grow food and build cities, about how these places were not just land, but part of who humans were as a species. His light projector created simple patterns to accompany his words. They were nowhere near as sophisticated as natural Thessian communication, but they carried intention and effort. He talked about memory and identity, about how places could hold the stories of a people. He was attempting to explain that humanity's territorial concerns were not about greed, but about preserving the spaces where human culture had been born and grown. The chamber was completely silent. Every alien delegate was watching him. Jiho could feel sweat on his back, but he continued. He had practiced this concept over and over in his head during the long hours of negotiation. Now he was putting it into practice, hoping that his pronunciation was close enough that his light patterns made some kind of sense. When he finished, the silence stretched out. Jiho stood there, vulnerable and exposed, wondering if he had just embarrassed himself and humanity even more than before. Then Velnara stood up. Her light patterns had changed to a brilliant combination of colors that Jiho had never seen before. They pulsed and shifted, beautiful and complex. She spoke in Thessian, her voice carrying emotion that the standard translators usually flattened. Jiho understood most of it. She was explaining to her fellow delegates what he had tried to say, filling in the gaps where his vocabulary failed. But she was also adding something else. She was telling them that a human had learned enough of their language to attempt expressing a sophisticated cultural concept, that this was unprecedented, that it deserved consideration. Ambassador Kylthra, Velnara's superior and the head of the Thessian delegation, leaned forward. His patterns were a deep, thoughtful blue. He spoke in Galactic Common but looked directly at Jiho. "You spoke of shared space honored by memory," he said. "This is a concept sacred to my people. You understand it?" "I am trying to understand it," Jiho said honestly. "Velnara has been teaching me. I know my understanding is incomplete, but I think humans have something similar even if we express it differently. We carry our history in places. They shape who we are." Kylthra exchanged looks with the other Thessian delegates. Their patterns shifted and changed as they communicated in ways Jiho could only partly follow. Finally, Kylthra nodded. "Perhaps we have been too quick to judge human motives," he said. "If you understand this concept enough to speak of it in our language, then perhaps your territorial concerns have more depth than we assumed." The negotiations resumed, but with a different tone. The Thessians asked more questions, seeking to understand rather than simply trading demands. Ambassador Park shot Jiho a look that was equal parts grateful and astonished. Hyun was grinning from the back of the room. When the session ended, Velnara approached Jiho. Her patterns were a warm gold color. "That was dangerous," she said. "If you had made a serious error, you could have offended them deeply." "I know," Jiho admitted. "But I also knew that words alone were not working. We needed to reach them in a way that made sense to their worldview." "You took what I taught you this morning and applied it by afternoon," Velnara said. There was something like admiration in her voice. "That is impressive cognitive flexibility. Humans are good at adapting," Jiho said. "It is one of our strengths. We have to be. We are still learning how this galactic community works." Velnara tilted her head, studying him. "I have been thinking about your species since we began our lessons," she said. "You lack many advantages that other species possess. No natural light communication, no telepathic abilities. Your lifespans are short. Your technology is centuries behind the galactic standard. By all logical measures, humans should be insignificant in the grand scale of things." "That is encouraging," Jiho said dryly. Velnara's patterns flickered with amusement. "But you have something that many older species have lost. You still believe that effort matters. You think you can overcome your limitations through sheer determination and creativity. Most species either have natural advantages or they accept their limitations. Humans refuse to accept limitation as final." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Jiho asked. "I am still deciding," Velnara said. "But today, watching you stand in front of the delegation and attempt something that should be impossible for your species, I found it touching." She paused over that last word as if testing its weight. "Yes, that is the right word in your language. Touching. Your effort touches something in me that I thought I had forgotten." "What did you forget?" Jiho asked quietly. Velnara's patterns shifted to a deeper, more somber blue. That communication is not about demonstrating superiority. It is about building bridges between different ways of seeing the universe. My people have spoken Thessian for thousands of years. It is perfect to us. We have forgotten what it is like to struggle with expression, to reach across a gap with inadequate tools and hope that someone on the other side will understand the intention behind the clumsy words. She looked at him directly. You reminded me of that. When I first laughed at your greeting, I was laughing at the clumsiness. But now I understand that the clumsiness is not the point. The courage to try despite the clumsiness is what matters. Jiho felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Thank you for teaching me, he said, and for giving me a chance after I made such a poor first impression. Poor first impressions can lead to surprising friendships, Velnara said. That is something else I am relearning. As they left the diplomatic chamber together, Jiho thought about how much had changed in just a week. He had gone from being mocked to being heard. More importantly, he had helped Velnara remember something her species had forgotten. That was worth every hour of frustration and every moment of embarrassment. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs came not from being perfect, but from being brave enough to be imperfect in front of others. Jiho woke early the next morning to find Hyun already in his quarters, sitting at the small desk with a cup of coffee and several data tablets spread out before him. Hyun looked up when Jiho stirred, and there was concern in his eyes. I have been researching all night, Hyun said without greeting. The Thessian language is even more complex than we thought. There are 47 distinct tonal variations, and that is just the spoken part. The light patterns add another layer of meaning that changes based on context, emotion, and even the time of day. Jiho sat up and rubbed his face. His body still ached with the embarrassment of yesterday, but his mind was already moving forward. Tell me more, he said. Hyun shook his head. Jiho, no human has ever held a real conversation in Thessian, not without translators. Their biology gives them advantages we cannot match. When they speak, their light patterns provide context that words alone do not carry. Without that, you are only understanding half of what is being said. Then I will learn to read the light patterns, Jiho said simply. How? Hyun gestured at the tablets. I have downloaded every recording we have of Thessian communication. There are patterns here that our computer systems cannot fully analyze. Some of them are so subtle that our cameras barely capture them. And you want to learn this with your human eyes and a simple light projector? Yes, Jiho said. I do. Hyun stared at him for a long moment, then sighed and smiled. You are stubborn. You know that? I have been told that before, Jiho said. He took one of the tablets and began scrolling through the recordings. Hours of Thessian communication filled the screen, patterns of light dancing across alien faces as they spoke. To most people, it would look like random flashing. But Jiho had trained himself to see patterns in chaos. It was what made him good at languages in the first place. He spent the entire day in his quarters, watching recordings over and over. He slowed them down and analyzed each shift in color and intensity. He began to notice things. When a Thessian spoke about the past, their patterns tended to pulse from their center outward. When discussing the future, the patterns moved inward. Emotions seemed to be coded in color. Blues for calm or thoughtful states, reds for passion or urgency, greens for growth or learning. But there were gaps in his understanding. Whole conversations where the meaning seemed to shift in ways he could not predict. He needed help, but who would teach him? The Thessians had made their opinion clear. They thought his attempts were amusing at best. That evening, Jiho went to the observation deck. It was his favorite place on the station, a quiet area where he could think and watch the stars. He was surprised to find he was not alone. Velnara stood near the large window, her light patterns glowing softly in the dim room. She was looking at Earth. Jiho almost turned around to leave, but she spoke before he could. Do not go, she said in Galactic Common. I was hoping to speak with you. He approached carefully, standing a respectful distance away. You wanted to speak with me? Velnara turned to face him. Her patterns shifted through several colors he could not interpret. I have been watching you, she said, through the station cameras. I hope you do not mind. It is publicly accessible footage. Watching me? Jiho was confused. Yes, I watched you in your quarters today. You spent 12 hours studying our language. Her patterns pulsed with what might have been curiosity. Why? After yesterday, after we laughed at you, why would you continue? Jiho thought about his answer carefully. Because I want to understand you, he said simply. Not through a machine translator, but truly understand. The way your people communicate, the way you think. Language is not just words. It is a window into how a culture sees the universe. Velnara was silent for a moment. Her patterns shifted to a deep purple color. You are sincere, she said, and she sounded surprised. Of course I am sincere, Jiho said. Why would I spend 3 years learning your language if I was not sincere? Because humans are new to the galactic community, Velnara replied. We have seen many new species try to advance quickly through clever tricks and shortcuts. We thought perhaps you were trying to impress us with a superficial display. It was not superficial, Jiho said. It was just inadequate. There is a difference. Velnara made a sound that might have been a laugh, but gentler than before. You are right. There is a difference. She turned back to the window. I owe you an apology. My laughter yesterday was unkind. You found my pronunciation funny, Jiho said. I understand. I am sure it was objectively terrible. It was, Velnara agreed, and this time there was warmth in her voice. But terrible in an endearing way, like watching a child take their first steps. Clumsy but brave. They stood in silence for a while, watching Earth rotate slowly in the darkness. Finally, Velnara spoke again. What you are attempting is truly impossible, you know. Even with dedication, there are biological limitations you cannot overcome. My grandmother learned 7 languages in her lifetime, Jiho said. She fled her country as a refugee with nothing. Each new place she went, she learned the language because she had to survive. She could not afford fancy translator devices. She told me that every language she learned made her more human, not less. It expanded what she was capable of thinking and feeling. Velnara's patterns shifted to a soft gold color. Your grandmother sounds wise. She was, Jiho said. She taught me that the point of learning language is not perfection. The point is connection. Even clumsy words spoken with genuine care mean more than perfect words spoken with indifference. That is a very human philosophy, Velnara observed. Maybe, Jiho said. But is it wrong? Velnara did not answer immediately. Her patterns cycled through several colors, blue, purple, gold, then settling on green. No, she said finally. It is not wrong. In fact, it reminds me of something my people used to believe long ago, before we became so certain of our superiority. She turned to face him fully. I will make you an offer, Jiho. I will teach you Thessian properly, not because I think you will ever master it, but because your effort deserves more than mockery. You have shown respect for my culture. The least I can do is show respect for your determination. Jiho felt surprise and hope rise in his chest. You would do that? I would, Velnara said. But you must understand the commitment you are making. This will be difficult. You will fail many times, and even at your best you will never speak as a native Thessian does. I understand, Jiho said. When do we start? Velnara's patterns flashed with amusement. Eager. That is good. We start tomorrow morning. Meet me in conference room 7 at dawn cycle. And Jiho? She paused. Bring your light projector. It is crude, but it shows creative thinking. We will work with what you have. After Velnara left, Jiho remained on the observation deck for a long time. Hyun found him there an hour later, grinning like an idiot at the stars. What happened? Hyun asked. She is going to teach me, Jiho said.
Velnara is going to teach me Thessian. Hyun's eyes widened.
The diplomat who laughed at you is now volunteering to be your teacher? Yes. Hyun shook his head in disbelief. Jiho, you are either the luckiest or the most stubborn person I have ever met. Probably both, Jiho said, echoing his words from yesterday. But this time he said them with a smile. The evening cycle found Jiho and Velnara in a small private meeting room, away from the formal diplomatic spaces. They had fallen into a routine over the past 2 weeks. After the official meetings ended, they would meet here for what Velnara called real conversation practice. No agendas, no political objectives, just 2 people trying to understand each other across the vast gap of different biologies and cultures. Velnara had brought what she called memory crystals, small objects that glowed with soft internal light. They were traditional Thessian teaching tools, each one encoded with cultural stories and lessons. She held one up now, and its light cast moving shadows across her face. "Today I want to ask you a question," she said in Thessian, speaking slowly so Jiho could follow. "Why did you really spend 3 years learning my language?" The truth, not the diplomatic answer. Jiho considered the question carefully. Velnara had earned honesty from him. "My grandmother," he said in Thessian, then paused, searching for the right words. He switched to Galactic Common for clarity. "May I tell you about her?" "Please," Velnara said, setting down the crystal and giving him her full attention. "She was born in a small country during a time of war," Jiho began. "She had to flee when she was young, maybe 20 years old. She went to a different country where she did not speak the language. She had no money, no family there, nothing but what she could carry." Velnara's patterns shifted to a somber blue. "She was a refugee." "Yes," Jiho said. "She told me stories about those first months. How terrifying it was to not understand what people were saying, to not know if someone was being kind or cruel, helpful or dismissive. She said it was like being blind and deaf at the same time, cut off from the world around her." "So she learned the language," Velnara said. "She learned it," Jiho confirmed. "She worked during the day at whatever job she could find, and at night she studied. She listened to the radio even when she understood nothing, just to hear the sounds. She talked to anyone who would talk to her, even when they laughed at her mistakes. It took her 2 years to become fluent." "That is dedication," Velnara said. "But that was not the end," Jiho continued. "She eventually had to move to another country. So she learned that language too. Then another move, another language. By the time I knew her, she could speak 7 languages. Some better than others, but all well enough to live and work and make friends." Jiho paused, remembering his grandmother's hands gesturing as she told stories, switching languages mid-sentence when one captured a feeling better than another. "She told me that each language she learned did not just let her talk to more people. It changed how she thought. Each language carried a different way of seeing the world, and by learning it she gained that vision. She became more than what she was born as, bigger inside." Velnara's patterns had shifted to a deep purple. A color Jiho had learned meant she was deeply engaged in thought. "This philosophy shaped you," she said. "Everything about me," Jiho agreed. "She raised me after my parents died. She taught me that language was humanity's greatest tool, not for dominance but for connection. She said that every language barrier was like a wall between people, and every word you learned was a brick you removed from that wall." "A beautiful metaphor," Velnara said softly. "When humanity made first contact, when we learned there was a whole community of species out here in the galaxy, I thought about my grandmother," Jiho said. "I thought about how she must have felt arriving in a foreign country, unable to communicate. That is how humanity feels now. We are the refugees in a new world trying to find our place." He looked at Velnara directly. "So when I saw recordings of Thessian communication, when I learned that your species had a complex language that no human had truly learned, I saw it as a challenge but also as an opportunity. If I could learn even a little, if I could show that humans were willing to put in the effort to really understand other species, maybe we could build bridges instead of walls." Velnara was silent for a long moment. Her pattern cycled through colors, purple to gold to a soft green, then back to purple. "I need to tell you something," she finally said. "About my people and our history. About why your dedication affects me the way it does." She picked up the memory crystal again, turning it in her hands. 300 years ago, the Thessians encountered another species. They were called the Drethic. They were not as technologically advanced as we were, but they were trying hard to establish diplomatic relations with the galactic community. "What happened to them?" Jiho asked. "The Drethic tried to learn Thessian," Velnara said. "They studied for years. They sent delegates who attempted to speak our language in formal meetings. And we laughed at them just as I laughed at you. We thought their efforts were amusing. We saw it as proof that they were inferior, that some species were simply not capable of true sophistication." Jiho felt a cold understanding settling in his stomach. "What happened?" "The Drethic became frustrated," Velnara said. Her patterns had gone dark, muted. They felt dismissed and mocked. Over time, that frustration turned to anger, then to hostility. There were misunderstandings, escalations. Within 50 years, we were at war with them. A terrible war that cost both species dearly. "I am sorry," Jiho said quietly. "The war ended eventually," Velnara continued. "But the Drethic never forgave us. They isolated themselves from the galactic community. An entire species, full of potential and unique perspectives, lost to us because we were too proud to see the value in their efforts at communication. She set the crystal down and looked at Jiho. When you spoke Thessian that first day, clumsy and imperfect, I laughed. It was instinct, the same instinct that led my ancestors to mock the Drethic. But then I saw your face. I saw that you did not give up. You stood there embarrassed but determined and tried again. And I thought, what if this is our second chance? What if humanity is offering us the opportunity to not make the same mistake again? Jiho understood now why she had offered to teach him. It was not just about language. It was about redemption. That is why I have been teaching you, Velnara said. Not because I think you will ever speak perfect Thessian, but because you deserve respect for your effort. Because dismissing that effort would be repeating a mistake that cost my people greatly. Your grandmother would have liked you, Jiho said after a moment. She always said that the people worth knowing were the ones who learned from their mistakes. Velnara's patterns brightened to a warm gold. I think I would have liked your grandmother too. She sounds wise beyond what her years could contain. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Velnara picked up the memory crystal again. This crystal contains a story about the Drethic War, about what we lost and what we learned. I want you to have it. Not for your studies, but as a reminder that what we are doing here matters beyond just language lessons. We are trying to prevent history from repeating itself. Jiho took the crystal, feeling its warmth in his palm. I will keep it safe, he promised. I know you will, Velnara said. And Jiho, thank you for not giving up after I laughed at you. Thank you for being stubborn enough to keep trying. You have given me something I thought I had lost. What is that? Jiho asked. Hope that different species can truly understand each other, Velnara said. Not through translation devices or diplomatic protocols, but through genuine effort and mutual respect. Your grandmother was right. Every word learned is a brick removed from a wall. We are building something important here, you and I. Something bigger than both of us. As Jiho left the meeting room that night, he thought about his grandmother and wondered if she could see him now. He hoped she would be proud. He was doing what she had taught him, building bridges one word at a time, removing bricks from walls that divided people, making the universe a little bit smaller and a little more connected. It was hard work, but the best work usually was. News traveled fast in the diplomatic station. Within 3 weeks of Jiho's intervention in the territorial negotiations, word had spread throughout the galactic community that a human had learned to speak Thessian. Not perfectly, but well enough to discuss complex cultural concepts. It was unprecedented and it attracted attention. Dawn arrived at the station on a transport from Earth, her eyes bright with excitement. She was a xenoanthropologist, someone who studied alien cultures and behaviors. She had sent Jiho dozens of messages begging him to help her establish a formal cultural exchange program. Now she stood in the station's receiving area with 2 large cases of equipment and an enthusiasm that could not be contained. This is incredible, she said, barely letting Jiho finish his greeting. Do you understand what you have accomplished? No human has ever achieved functional fluency in a non-humanoid language. The academic implications alone are revolutionary. Hyun, who had come to help with the luggage, smiled. Daeun maybe let him breathe for a moment. Sorry, Daeun said, though she did not look sorry at all. But Jiho, the university wants to fund a complete exchange program. Humans studying Thessian culture. Thessian studying human culture. Real academic collaboration between species. And it is all because you proved it was possible. Jiho felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just learned some of their language. Velnara did most of the work. That is not true, came a voice from behind them. Velnara approached with a young Thessian male. His patterns were a vibrant green that Jiho had learned indicated youth and curiosity. Jiho's success required dedication that most beings would not sustain. Daeun is correct. This is significant. Velnara gestured to her companion. This is Wubin, a young scholar from my world. He studies comparative linguistics. When he heard about our work together, he requested permission to come here and participate in cultural exchange. Wubin's patterns flashed with excitement, cycling through several colors rapidly. I have so many questions about human communication, he said in accented but clear galactic common. Your species uses such limited sensory input for language, only sound and visual symbols. Yet you have created thousands of distinct languages on your single planet. How is this possible? Daeun's face lit up. Oh, we are going to get along very well, she said. Over the next several days, the cultural exchange program took shape. Daeun set up equipment in one of the station's conference rooms, transforming it into a makeshift research lab. Jiho and Hyun helped install holographic displays and recording devices. Velnara coordinated with other Thessian scholars, and soon there were 4 Thessians on the station, all interested in studying human communication. The work was fascinating. Daeun conducted tests on how humans processed Thessian light patterns. She discovered that while humans could not naturally produce the patterns, they were surprisingly good at reading them. Human brains, always looking for patterns and meaning, could learn to interpret the basic emotional content of Thessian light communication with practice. It is your weakness turned into a strength, Velnara explained to the group during one session. Humans lack many sensory advantages. No echolocation like the Vreniks. No electromagnetic sense like the Quellan. This makes you focus intensely on the senses you do have. You read facial expressions, body language, tone of voice with incredible precision. It is how you compensate, Wubin added to this. I have been studying human literature and communication. You have a concept called reading between the lines. You are trained from childhood to understand implied meaning, subtext, what is not said directly. This is a sophisticated cognitive skill that many species do not develop because they have more direct forms of communication. So our limitations made us better at interpretation, Hyun said thoughtfully. Exactly, Daeun confirmed. She pulled up data on her tablet. Look at these results. After just 5 days of practice, Jiho can correctly interpret 70% of basic Thessian emotional patterns. That is remarkable cognitive flexibility. Jiho felt a mix of pride and embarrassment at being the center of attention. But the real breakthrough came during the second week of the exchange program. They were working on translation challenges, trying to find equivalent concepts between human and Thessian cultures. Daeun had asked both groups to describe their concept of home. The humans spoke about physical places, about family and belonging. The Thessians described something more complex, a word that meant the place where your light feels complete. It is not just a physical location, Velnara explained. It is a state of being, a sense of rightness. When a Thessian is in their true home, their light patterns become more vibrant and stable. We have something similar, Jiho said slowly, thinking it through in both languages. We call it belonging. The feeling that you are in the right place with the right people. That you are complete. Wubin's patterns flashed bright green. Yes, that is very close to our concept. The physical location is less important than the feeling of completeness. Daeun was typing rapidly, recording everything. This is it, she said excitedly. This is what the formal diplomatic translators miss. They translate words but not the emotional and cultural context behind those words. Jiho, you have been learning Thessian through cultural immersion. You understand not just what words mean but why they mean what they mean. Over the following days, they developed what Daeun called contextual translation frameworks. These were ways of explaining concepts that did not have direct equivalents by finding emotional or experiential bridges between cultures. It required understanding both cultures deeply, which meant it required time and effort that standard diplomatic protocols did not allow for. This should be standard practice for all first contact situations, Daeun said during one late-night session. Only she, Jiho, Velnara, and Wubin remained in the lab, the others having gone to rest. Imagine if every species took the time to really understand each other's worldviews before making treaties and agreements. It would change everything, Velnara agreed. Her patterns were a thoughtful purple, but it requires what Jiho has, patience and genuine curiosity. Most species want quick results. They want to use translators and get on with business. Humans are good at patience when it matters, Jiho said. My grandmother waited tables for 2 years while learning her third language. She could have stayed in jobs where language did not matter much, but she wanted to really integrate into the society, so she chose the hard path. The hard path often leads to the best destinations, Wubin said. His patterns had settled into a warm gold color that Jiho had learned meant contentment and wisdom. I think humans and Thessians have more in common than we first believed. We both value connection and understanding, even if we express it differently. Daeun looked up from her tablet. I want to propose something, she said. What if we formalize this? Create an institute dedicated to cross-species communication. Not just translation, but real cultural understanding. We could train people from different species to be cultural bridges like Jiho and Velnara have become. Velnara's patterns brightened with interest. An interspecies communication institute, she said. Training diplomats and scholars in deep cultural understanding rather than surface-level translation. It could prevent the kinds of misunderstandings that lead to conflict. It could prevent another Drethic situation, Jiho added quietly. Velnara met his eyes and nodded. Yes, it could. They spent the rest of the night drafting a proposal. Hyun joined them in the early morning, bringing coffee for the humans and a Thessian beverage that glowed faintly for Velnara and Wubin. Together, the group outlined what would become the foundation for a new approach to galactic diplomacy. As the station's artificial sun began its morning cycle, Jiho looked around at his companions. A human xenoanthropologist, a data analyst, a Thessian diplomat, and a young Thessian scholar. A few weeks ago, they had been strangers from different worlds. Now they were colleagues working toward a common goal, making the vast galaxy a little bit smaller and a little more understanding. His grandmother had been right. Every word learned was a brick removed from a wall. But it was more than that. Every friendship built across species lines was a bridge constructed over the void of space. And bridges once built could carry traffic in both directions. The work was just beginning. But for the first time since arriving at the station, Jiho felt like humanity had truly found its place in the galactic community. Not as inferior newcomers, but as partners bringing their own unique gifts to the table. The gift of patience. The gift of adaptation. The gift of believing that understanding was always possible if you were willing to put in the work. It was a very human gift, and it turned out the galaxy needed it. The proposal for an interspecies communication institute had been submitted to the Galactic Council 3 days ago. Since then, Jiho had been waiting anxiously for any response. He knew these things took time in the diplomatic world, but the waiting was difficult. He spent his mornings continuing lessons with Velnara, his afternoons helping Dayun with research, and his evenings trying not to think about all the ways their proposal could be rejected. On the 4th day, the summons came. All members of both the human and Thessian delegations were to appear before the full council for a hearing. Jiho felt his stomach twist with nervousness when Ambassador Park informed him. "They want you to present the proposal personally," she said. "You and Velnara together. The council wants to see the practical results of your collaboration." Hyun put a hand on Jiho's shoulder. "You will do fine. You have already proven that communication between species is possible. Now you just need to convince them it is worth investing in." The council chamber was much larger than the diplomatic conference room Jiho was used to. It was a circular space with seating arranged in tiers, representatives from dozens of species looking down at the central floor. The architecture was designed to be intimidating, and it worked. Jiho felt very small standing there. Velnara stood beside him, her patterns a calm blue that he found reassuring. "Remember," she said quietly in Thessian, "we are not asking for permission to do something impossible. We have already done the impossible. We are just asking for resources to help others do it too." The council leader, a tall being from a species Jiho did not recognize, opened the session. "We have reviewed your proposal for an interspecies communication institute. It is an ambitious project. Before we consider funding and official recognition, we have questions. The first questions were practical. How many staff would be needed? What species would be included? How long would training programs last?" Jiho and Velnara answered these together, their presentation flowing smoothly as they built on each other's points. Then a new voice spoke up. It came from the section where the Tavonian delegation sat. The Tavonians were a powerful species in the galactic community, known for their trading networks and political influence. The speaker was named Counselor Taiyang, and his tone was skeptical. "This proposal is based on a single success story," Taiyang said. "One human learned one alien language. That is commendable, but hardly proof that this approach is scalable or necessary. We have used translation technology for thousands of years. It works efficiently. Why should we invest in something as time-consuming as cultural immersion training?" Jiho felt Velnara tense beside him. This was the challenge they had been expecting. The belief that technology could replace understanding. "May I respond, Counselor?" Jiho asked. "Please," Taiyang said, gesturing for him to continue. Jiho took a breath. Translation technology is good at converting words from one language to another. But words are only part of communication. Context, emotion, cultural background. These things are lost in translation. And those lost elements are often where misunderstandings begin. An interesting theory, Taiyang said. But do you have evidence? Jiho had prepared for this. He activated a holographic display, showing data from the territorial negotiations. 3 weeks ago, the human-Thessian trade negotiations were failing. Both sides were using standard translators. Both sides thought they understood each other. But the translations could not capture a key Thessian concept that had no direct human equivalent. He pulled up recordings of the failed negotiations, showing the frustrated expressions and confused exchanges. The translators were working perfectly from a technical standpoint. Every word was accurately converted, but the meaning behind the words was lost. Velnara took over the presentation. The concept in question relates to how my people view territory and shared space. It is tied to our cultural identity in ways that a simple word-to-word translation cannot capture. When Jiho learned to speak Thessian through cultural immersion, he gained understanding of this concept. He was then able to bridge the gap in the negotiations. She showed the recording of Jiho's intervention, his halting but sincere explanation in Thessian. His pronunciation was imperfect. His grammar had errors, but he understood what we meant, and more importantly, we understood that he had made the effort to see things from our perspective. That changed the entire dynamic of the negotiations. Taiyang leaned back in his seat, considering. So you are arguing that effort matters more than technical accuracy? I am arguing that both matter, Velnara said. But in cases where perfect accuracy is impossible, which is most cross-species communication, the effort to understand shows respect. And respect is the foundation of all successful diplomacy. Another council member spoke up, this time from the Breskin delegation. I have a different concern. This proposal requires significant resources, time, funding, personnel. How do we know it will prevent the kind of conflicts you claim it will? This was where Velnara's story became important. She had given Jiho permission to share it if needed. He decided this was the moment. Counselor, 300 years ago, the Thessians encountered a species called the Drethic. Jiho began. He saw Velnara's patterns shift, but she nodded for him to continue. The Drethic tried to learn Thessian to improve diplomatic relations. The Thessians, including my colleague's ancestors, dismissed these efforts as inadequate. They relied on translators instead of recognizing the value in the Drethic's attempts at cultural understanding. The chamber had grown very quiet. Many species knew the story of the Drethic War, but few knew this aspect of how it started. The Drethic felt disrespected and dismissed, Jiho continued. That feeling grew into resentment, then hostility. Eventually, it led to a war that cost both species dearly. The Drethic isolated themselves from the galactic community and have not engaged in diplomacy since. He met Taiyang's eyes. We cannot know for certain that cultural understanding programs would have prevented that war. But we do know that dismissing sincere efforts at communication contributed to it. The cost of this program is measured in time and resources. The cost of another war like that is measured in lives. Velnara added, the Breskin delegation should particularly understand this concern. Your species has maintained peace with the Norvik, despite territorial disputes for over a century. I have studied your diplomatic history. That peace is maintained not through translators, but through cultural liaisons who have spent years learning to understand both perspectives. A Breskin counselor nodded slowly. This is true. Our liaison program has been effective. We are not proposing something entirely new, Jiho said. We are proposing to make systematic and formalized what some species already do informally, to train cultural bridges who can prevent misunderstandings before they escalate. Taiyang spoke again. You make compelling arguments, but I return to my original point. This is based on one success story. You, Jiho, learned Thessian. Can you prove that other humans or other species can do the same with different languages? Jiho smiled. Actually, yes. In the past 3 weeks, Dayun, our xenoanthropologist, has been learning basic Thessian. She is not as advanced as I am, but she has made remarkable progress. And Wubin, a young Thessian scholar, has been learning about human cultural concepts and communication styles. He can now explain human idioms and metaphors that would confuse most translators. Dayun and Wubin were in the audience. At Jiho's gesture, they stood. Dayun spoke first in careful but understandable Thessian. expressing her gratitude for the learning opportunity. Then Wubin explained in Galactic Common how he had come to understand the human concept of home is where the heart is, a phrase that made no literal sense but carried deep emotional meaning. The council members looked at each other. Discussions broke out in multiple languages. Jiho waited, his heart beating hard. Everything depended on this moment. Finally, the council leader raised a hand for silence. The council will deliberate on this proposal. However, I can say that you have made a strong case. The practical demonstration of cross-species learning is particularly persuasive. Taeyang stood. I wish to add a condition to any approval, he said. If this institute is established, I propose that it must include a trial period. 1 year to show measurable results in conflict prevention or diplomatic improvement. If successful, full funding continues. If not, the program ends. It was harsh but fair. Jiho looked at Velnara and she nodded. We accept those terms, she said. Then I will support the proposal, Taeyang said, with the condition I have stated. Other council members began expressing their positions. Not all were in favor, but momentum was building. By the end of the session, it was clear that the proposal would pass with the 1-year trial condition attached. As they left the chamber, Hyun hugged Jiho tightly. You did it, he said. You actually did it. We did it, Jiho corrected, gesturing to include Velnara, Daeun, and Wubin. None of this would have been possible without all of us working together. Velnara's patterns were bright gold, the happiest Jiho had seen them. 1 year to prove ourselves, she said. It will be challenging. Good, Jiho said. The best things usually are. They had won the first battle. Now came the real work of building something that could change how species understood each other. Acro 6 months had passed since the Council's approval. The Interspecies Communication Institute occupied an entire wing of the diplomatic station now, its rooms filled with students from a dozen different species. The sound of various languages being practiced echoed through the corridors, creating a symphony of attempted understanding. Jiho stood in the main training room watching a class in progress. A Mandarin student was attempting to vocalize human emotional expressions, their multiple arms gesturing in ways that approximated human body language. It was clumsy and imperfect, but it was sincere. The human instructor, a woman named Sunhee who had joined the program 2 months ago, offered gentle corrections and encouragement. How are the numbers looking? Velnara asked, coming to stand beside him. Her patterns were a mix of blue and gold. What Jiho had learned meant she was cautiously optimistic about something. Better than expected, Jiho said. He pulled up data on his tablet. We have 43 students currently enrolled from 17 different species. Completion rate is at 87%. And most importantly, we have our first success story beyond ourselves. The Breskin-Norvek situation? Velnara asked. Yes, Jiho confirmed. The territorial dispute that had been stalled for 3 months. One of our graduates, a Breskin named Rince, was brought in as a cultural consultant. She had spent 8 weeks in our intensive program, learning about Norvek communication styles and cultural values. Within 2 weeks of her involvement, both sides reached an agreement. Velnara's patterns brightened. That is exactly the kind of measurable result the council wanted to see. It is, Jiho agreed. But we both know 6 months is not enough data to guarantee continued funding. Taeyang and the others will want to see consistent results. As if summoned by speaking his name, a message appeared on Jiho's tablet. It was from Counselor Taeyang himself requesting a meeting. Jiho showed it to Velnara, and her patterns flickered with concern. Either very good news or very bad news, she said. They met Taeyang in one of the station's formal meeting rooms 2 hours later. The counselor was accompanied by Ambassador Kael'thra, Velnara's superior, which Jiho took as a positive sign. If they were going to shut down the program, they probably would not have involved Kael'thra. Taeyang did not waste time with pleasantries. I have been reviewing your progress reports, he said. The results are interesting. Interesting good or interesting bad? Jiho asked, then immediately regretted being so direct with a council member. But Taeyang smiled slightly. Interesting good, mostly. The Breskin-Norvek resolution was impressive. I have also seen reports of improved diplomatic relations in 3 other cases where your graduates were involved. However, I have concerns. Velnara leaned forward. What concerns, Counselor? Scale and sustainability, Taeyang said. Your program is effective, but it is slow. Students spend weeks or months learning about a single other species. In a galaxy with thousands of intelligent species, how can this approach ever be practical? It was a fair question, and one Jiho had been thinking about since the program began. We are not trying to teach people to understand every species, he said. That would be impossible. What we are teaching is the skill of cultural learning itself. How to observe, how to ask questions, how to recognize when your own cultural assumptions are blocking understanding. Kylthra spoke for the first time, a framework for understanding rather than specific knowledge. Exactly, Velnara said. Once someone learns how to bridge one cultural gap, they develop skills that transfer to other situations. It is like learning to swim. The first time is difficult and takes instruction. But once you know how to swim in one body of water, you can adapt to others. An elegant metaphor, Taeyang said. But I need more than metaphors. I need proof that this skill transfer actually occurs. Jiho activated a holographic display. We have been tracking this. Students who complete our program and then encounter a new species they have not studied show 43% better diplomatic outcomes compared to control groups using only standard translators. It is not as good as someone who has specifically studied that species, but it is significantly better than having no training at all. 43%, Taeyang repeated, studying the data. That is substantial. There is something else, Velnara added. Something we did not include in the formal reports because it is harder to quantify. But I believe it is the most important result. What is that? Kylthra asked. Changed attitudes, Velnara said. Students who go through this program develop respect for the difficulty of cross-species communication. They learn humility. They understand that their way of seeing the universe is not the only valid way. This attitude shift prevents the kind of casual dismissal that leads to conflicts. She paused, her patterns shifting to a deep purple. When I first met Jiho, I laughed at his attempts to speak Thessian. I thought his efforts were amusing proof of human limitations. Now I understand that my laughter was a symptom of arrogance. This program teaches people not to laugh at sincere efforts at connection. Taeyang was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I came here today expecting to find a well-intentioned but impractical experiment. Instead, I find something with real potential. But I am still not convinced about long-term sustainability. What would convince you? Jiho asked. A demonstration, Taeyang said. The council will convene in 2 weeks to make the final decision on permanent funding. I want you to conduct a public trial of your methods, something that shows clearly how this approach differs from standard diplomatic procedures. Jiho and Velnara exchanged glances. What kind of trial did you have in mind? Velnara asked carefully. There is a dispute between the Yanari and the Korthan species, Taeyang said. It has been ongoing for 15 years. Both sides claim ownership of a resource-rich asteroid belt. Standard diplomatic negotiations have gone nowhere. If your methods can show progress where traditional diplomacy has failed, that would be compelling evidence. 15 years is a long time, Jiho said. A lot of resentment must have built up. Which makes it a true test, Taeyang replied. I am not expecting you to solve the problem completely, but if you can demonstrate that cultural understanding opens new avenues for dialogue, that would be enough. After Taeyang and Kylthra left, Jiho and Velnara sat in silence for a while. Finally, Hyun, who had been waiting outside, came in. I heard most of that through the door, he admitted. This is a big challenge. It is, Jiho agreed. But it is also an opportunity. If we can help with a conflict that has lasted 15 years, it proves the value of what we are doing. Do we have anyone who has studied both Yanari and Korthan cultures? Velnara asked. Hyun checked his database. No, none of our students have focused on either species. They are both fairly isolationist, which is probably part of why the dispute has lasted so long. Then we go ourselves, Jiho said. We have 2 weeks to learn as much as we can about both species. It will not be deep expertise, but we can apply the principles we have been teaching. You want to practice what we preach, Velnara said, her patterns showing a mix of amusement and concern. Exactly, Jiho said. We have been telling students that the skills transfer to new situations. Time to prove it. The next 2 weeks were intense. Jiho and Velnara barely slept, dividing their time between studying Yanari and Korthan languages, customs, and histories. Dayun helped by gathering all available anthropological data. Wubin analyzed communication patterns. Hyun organized everything into useful frameworks. The Yanari communicated primarily through scent markers, which made them extremely difficult for most species to understand. The Korthan used a combination of gestures and clicking sounds. Both species considered the other's communication style crude and inferior, which had contributed to their mutual hostility. On the day of the trial, the council chamber was full. Representatives from both the Yanari and Korthan delegations sat on opposite sides, as far apart as the architecture allowed. The tension in the room was obvious. Councillor Taeyang opened the session. "We are here to observe a demonstration of cultural communication methods. Jiho of Earth and Velnara of Thessia will attempt to facilitate dialogue between the Yanari and Korthan delegations regarding their territorial dispute." The Yanari spokesperson, whose name was Gaon, made a series of scent releases that the translators rendered as, "This is pointless. We have said everything there is to say." The Korthan spokesperson, Minseok, clicked rapidly in what the translator called aggressive agreement. "We have no new positions. Why waste our time?" Jiho stepped forward. He had prepared carefully for this moment. "I ask permission to address both delegations," he said formally. Both spokespersons made gestures of grudging acceptance. "I am not here to propose solutions to your dispute," Jiho began. "I am not qualified to judge which side has better claims. I am here to ask if you are both willing to try something different." "Different how?" Gan asked, suspicion clear in the chemical markers. "You have been negotiating through translators for 15 years, Jiho said." "Oh,